I welcome you, friends. I apologize for the long absence. There were very good reasons for that. Trump is trying to hold a 911 campaign with tariffs again, but it won't work. U.S. President Donald Trump has made another 911-like surprise by imposing massive tariffs on most of the U.S. trading partners. The reason this event was similar to 911 is that both the tariffs and 911 were a response to China's demands that the U.S. return its borrowed gold or else they would go bankrupt. It turns out that Trump's henchman in this case is Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. On September 11, 2001, Lutnick accidentally failed to show up for work when most of his firm's employees, Cantor Fitzgerald, were eliminated. Cantor Fitzgerald is one of the few financial institutions that are allowed to receive money directly from the magical monetary source of the Federal Reserve Board. On September 12, 2001, the government was supposed to return the Chinese royal gold, which it had lent to the Federal Reserve Board in 1938. Instead, the U.S. government organized September 11, 2001, and sent the remnants of Chinese gold to the Nazis in Paraguay. Then the U.S. invaded Iraq to steal oil, pay the Chinese, and avoid default. This time, Trump hopes to raise money through tariffs to pay the Chinese and end the chronic trade deficit that makes the United States financially dependent on China. An attempt to deal with the deficit is long overdue, but the tariff approach is too little and too late. Simple calculations show that it will fail. The United States has had a trade deficit with the rest of the world for 49 years, or since 1976. As a result, they have accumulated a debt of $37 trillion. The Trump administration expects the tariffs to generate $600 billion a year. This means that it will take 61 years to use the customs revenue to pay off the entire debt. In addition, it will not help pay off the $250 trillion of unsecured U.S. obligations. The Trump administration also said the tariffs would make the income tax redundant. As a result, many Americans have decided to stop paying income taxes, which means that $500 billion less in taxes is expected to be paid by April 15th, which will negate most of the customs revenue. We understand that Trump wants to use tariffs to restore production capacity in the United States. However, Peter Schiff points this out. If the United States starts building factories and developing the necessary infrastructure and supply chains, what will we stop doing to pay for it? Shopping is one thing. Americans will have to drastically reduce their expenses and increase their savings. But this means a severe recession with a growing budget deficit as spending rises and tax revenues decline. Tariffs won't help much because if consumers buy less, imports will decrease dramatically, leading to lower tax revenues. This means that the deficit will displace all the savings needed to finance America's reindustrialization. In addition, foreign investors will no longer invest their large trading surpluses in our government bond market. Then who will buy the existing $26 trillion government bonds that will mature over the next 4 years? If the Americans have to buy back all these debts, where will the money for the construction of factories come from? The only way to attract the necessary investments is to allow the government to reduce spending during the recession, including on lawsuits and defense, and probably stop servicing the national debt. The tariffs will deprive the average American household of about $7,300 a year in purchasing power. The head of MI6 says, Mr. Trump is currently causing economic chaos around the world and destabilizing relations in the country. He needs to be put in his place, just like his minions. All this chaos is just a distraction to delay the inevitable. There is a simpler answer, Mr. Trump. On his desk is a generous offer from the Dragon family for virtually unlimited funding. The Dragon family controls most of the real money in the world because the Chinese have had huge trade surpluses reflecting the U.S. deficit for decades. And while Americans consume 68% of their incomes, saving only 4%, the Chinese consume 39% and save 40%. The Chinese used their savings to create production facilities more than twice the size of the United States. In addition, they have done a lot of smart things, such as using drones and robots to landscape deserts. In addition, in 2023, only 14.8% of all Chinese exports went to the United States, so tariffs won't cause too much damage to China's economy. However, the Chinese admit that they have hit a brick wall and have more savings than they can invest profitably. Economic problems may be one of the reasons that 176,000 Chinese left the country as political refugees in 2024, the highest number since 1951, according to the UN. All of this means that the Chinese would most like to spend their savings on things like building huge factories and high-speed rail in the United States. Many of them would also like to live in the United States. The Chinese government has officially responded to Trump's tariffs with this statement. Pressure and threats are the wrong way to negotiate with China. Sino-American economic and trade relations should be based on mutual benefit and mutually beneficial cooperation. These are the aspirations of all people, while economic coercion that pits nations against each other inevitably has unpleasant consequences. The Chinese concluded their statement with the words, "The world needs justice, not hegemony." The fear of justice and the desire to maintain hegemony may be the reason why Trump rejected the offer of unlimited funding. But justice will prevail. Last week, we independently learned from sources at the U.S. Space Agency, MI6, and the Russian Federal Security Service that the Trump administration would not live to see 2025. The head of MI6 comments, "This is a serious matter. The compromising control of the U.S. president will take off like a balloon. We fought against the falsification of the results, which allowed him to run for a second term, and now we find out that he should have been ousted and someone else appointed. This is what was sent to us by a Mossad agent who, until recently, was an ardent Trump supporter. Who remembers Trump's mother saying that? Yes, he's a jerk with zero common sense and no social skills, but he's my son. I just hope he never goes into politics. That would be a disaster." Mary and Trump, he added this comment, "Should we believe Trump? Hell, nitrogen monoxide, he's clearly either on illegal substances or under the double control of the Zionists. He used to be too smart to suddenly become so unreasonable." And Netanyahu is meeting with him again on Monday. "Hey, Mr. President, why don't you focus entirely on the problems inside your country instead of serving Israel, destroying countries that don't matter to us anyway?" Sources in the U.S. Space Force claim that the Trump who was on the secret island is a fake and that there is a real Trump in a white hat at the Cheyenne Mount Space Base. Of course, we would like to believe that. However, Epstein's files have not yet been declassified, and we see Trump, who is apparently in power, advocating mass utilization in Gaza and threatening Iran. We'll talk about this below. But first, something much more pressing happened behind the scenes. The Russian FSB provided the Five Eyes intelligence network with carefully documented evidence that the Pentagon had established an extensive network of laboratories in Ukraine and was trying to use their developments to eliminate a significant number of bipeds. Details about the Pentagon's activities are extremely dangerous and can provoke a serious scare, warns MI6. The head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, was convicted of participating in the scandalous payment of €400 million, £355 million to a businessman. Since she is now the head of the European Central Bank, this is clearly a power grab for the EU printing press. In addition, King Charles III, who is fighting an aggressive form of cancer, was forced by senior royal advisors to resign immediately. They didn't ask, not offered. It's arranged. We have heard that the fake Pope and the fake King Charles must be overthrown along with Lagarde in order to take control of the Western financial system. We hope, but cannot confirm, that this is due to the preparation of the deal with the Dragon family and the anniversary. In addition, headlines such as Klaus Schwab resigns and Malaysia stops searching for Flight 370 show that lies are being removed from the official narrative. We will hear even more because the death of Israel is near, the Iranian official comments. For their part, the Khazar Group is in the midst of a desperate, last-minute push to launch World War III. Germany has just sent troops to Lithuania, marking the first permanent overseas deployment since World War II. The EU is going to loot all the savings accounts in the EU to send them to Ursula's weapon manufacturing buddies. This is a warning. Tons of military cargo are being delivered to Ukraine via Romania. It seems that the EU really wants to fight to the end. The BND Federal Intelligence Service and the Bundeswehr suggest that Russia views the West as a systematic enemy, is building up its military power, and is preparing for a full-scale confrontation with NATO. The Russian news agency TASS, in turn, reports Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić said after signing the document on Serbian-Hungarian strategic defense cooperation that Belgrade and Budapest are working to create a comprehensive military alliance. Think about it for a moment. NATO member Hungary is entering into a military alliance with Russia's ally Serbia. This means that the Austro-Hungarian monarchy has returned and is entering into an alliance with Russia against Western Europe. Finland is also preparing to reopen its border with Russia, a sign that it is reconsidering its involvement in the NATO campaign against Russia. The US will definitely not fight Russia to protect the EU. French journalist Thierry Mason writes, "For a month, the G7 meetings were held without the participation of the United States. The political coordination of the West was provided by the G7, a series of meetings at all levels at which a common narrative was developed. However, during a virtual meeting of heads of state and government on February 24, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump refused to sign the final communiqué and threatened his partners with withdrawal from the G7 if they published it without his consent." Manfred Weber, leader of the European People's Party (EPP), noted that the Trump administration is questioning fundamental things for no reason. "I'm afraid the old America won't come back. We are now living in a new world order." Russian influential politician Dmitry Medvedev notes, "In any case, Russia does almost no trade with the United States or the EU, so there is no reason to be upset about this. We will follow Lao Tzu's advice and sit by the river, waiting for the body of the enemy to float by, the decomposing corpse of the EU economy. In the EU, they resist with their hands and feet. Their persecution of every populist leader proves that democracy is an illusion." The latest example, French justice has excluded the popular politician Marine Le Pen from the list of candidates. Her answer was, "We don't want to be pushed. And we will not allow this, not to protect ourselves, but to protect the French people who have the right to choose whom they want, and to protect the country because today it is on the edge of the abyss." Another example of the abuse of money printing machines. Ursula von der Leyen's European Commission has paid millions to environmental groups for targeted smear campaigns against political opponents and dissidents. In addition to the war drums in Europe, the Khazar Band is still desperately trying to create a greater Israel. The map that the Zionists planned is actually a map of the ancient and cruel Satan-worshipping state of Assyria, not historical Judea. That's why they're promoting their massive sacrifices with the support of the fake Trump. According to a Mossad source, the people of Gaza should know that this is the beginning of the end of the Zionist state. The Zionist state will not survive. To stay in the same place, you need to kill, kill, and kill. That's the only thing they know how to do. Netanyahu is especially desperate to start an all-out war because the millstones of justice are being turned against him. Jonathan Urich, Netanyahu's senior media advisor, and Eli Feldstein, his military spokesman, were arrested as part of an investigation into links between the Israeli Prime Minister's office and Qatari officials. 2 officers were arrested on suspicion of having links with a foreign agent, money laundering, accepting bribes, fraud, and treason. Netanyahu, who testified in court on Monday in his own corruption and fraud cases, was forced to leave the courtroom to testify in the case of his confidants. A sign of Netanyahu's preparations for war is the arrival of new reinforcements, bringing the total number of U.S. forces in the Middle East to 300,000, including both combat and administrative units. This promotion prompted China's ambassador to the United Nations, Fu Kong, to make a statement. China urges Israel to withdraw from Syria and Lebanon immediately. The political transition in Syria is in a critical phase. Pentagon sources say the real Trump doesn't want a war with Iran. However, Trump is ready to flex his muscles and show restraint in order to create urgency and force Iran to bend the knee. Iranian sources are not too concerned. They tell us the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq, and Bahrain have secretly notified Tehran that they will not allow the United States to use its air bases to attack Iran. Iranian sources also told us Elon Musk bought, through a third party, the Iranian car manufacturer Iran Khodro, and Iran has huge reserves of lithium. Elon Musk got what he wanted, and now he's leaving the administration. Mission accomplished. Since Musk represents the National Intelligence Agency, this means that a significant part of the U.S. military is de facto allied with Iran. The Turks, who have the largest army in the Middle East, note that Netanyahu and members of his government have been charged with war crimes, and Israel has been charged with genocide. This is what the Chinese and others call justice. She's on the rise. In a sign of elite panic over impending justice, Stephen Colbert stared into the camera at the beginning of his late-night monologue on Thursday, pleading with a clique of financial and government elites pulling strings behind the scenes to step in when President Donald Trump announced reciprocal tariffs. Said Colbert, "But if they exist, then I want to tell the clique of financial and government elites pulling the strings behind the scenes, maybe take a break from your orgy with JFK Jr's adrenochrome chemtrail with a 5G chip and jump in here. Because we're going to fucking die." Here's some news that probably bothered him. The U.S. Africa Development Fund, located near the White House, banned the DOGE's agents from entering their territory, which was guarded by their own police officers. The employees hid like crazy so that no one could discover their plan. Dr. Peter Marks, director of the Doge Biologics Evaluation and Research Center and the organizer of Operation Warp Speed, was faced with a choice: either resign or be fired. It is estimated that only 10 to 20% of all procedures currently used in medical practice have been found to be effective in controlled trials. Think again, 80 to 90% of medical activity is fraud. A cell phone tower on a school campus suspected of causing cancer in students has been removed. The president of Argentina declassified documents indicating that Hitler did not die at the end of the war, but went to Argentina and lived comfortably there and became rich. After all, he was a Rothschild from the Khazar tribe, so nothing could have happened to him. The entire web of lies and malice of the Khazars is in the process of disintegrating, and Colbert is probably afraid of what awaits him if this process accelerates. The clique he refers to is trying to do something about the situation in the United States by using hired mobs. The Soros-funded indivisible organization openly admits to being behind the 1,300 paid protests that are taking place in all 50 states today. Billionaire Democrats are financing these uprisings and must be held legally responsible for violence and vandalism. The Chicago protest attracted only 7,500 participants, of whom 92% participated in 5 or more Kamala Harris rallies and Taifa BLM events or protests against Hamas and pro-Palestine. Judging by this official news article from China's Xinhua, it's safe to assume that many of the NGOs that bust the protesters received money from China to organize the event, according to the money data. According to organizers, in the United States, about 600,000 people took part in more than 1,400 protests in all 50 states under the slogan "Hands Off." Organized by a coalition of more than 150 groups, including civil rights organizations, labor unions, and veterans associations, the protesters gathered outside state capitals, federal buildings, congressional offices, Social Security Agency headquarters, town halls, and public parks. The Chinese have also retaliated against Trump by imposing restrictions on exports of rare earth metals, which the U.S. military badly needs. According to Pentagon sources, they are negotiating with the Russians, Ukrainians, and the government of Myanmar about alternative supplies. Sources also report that another Chinese submarine base was destroyed. A 7.2 magnitude earthquake struck off the coast of Papua New Guinea. A tsunami warning has been issued. The depth is 10 km. When Vice President of the United States J.D. Vance said, "We borrow money from Chinese farmers to buy what they produce," the Chinese responded as follows: "We borrow money from Chinese farmers to buy what they produce. You fool, you buy high-tech products in China and try to steal centrifuges for refining rare earths because you can't invent them yourself, but you sell China soy chips and Canadian timber. You live in the space of propaganda posters from the McCarthy era, where the whole of communist Asia is transformed into a meta-organism from Korea to Vietnam, which wears a cap with a red star and rummages in rice beds." Speaking of red stars, the popular MAGA caps in the USA are made in China and remind me of the old Mao caps. In conclusion, we all hope that Chairman Trump will make all these demonstrations as preparation for a deal with China and the rest of the world. According to several intelligence sources, much can still be resolved by June. Don't forget that Trump, the Dragon family, and the whole world are ready to help you. All you have to do is pick up the phone.